And soon, mechanically, dispirited after a dreary day with the prospect of a depressing morrow, I raised to my lips a spoonful of the tea in which I had soaked a morsel of the cake. No sooner had the warm liquid mixed with the crumbs touched my palate than a shudder ran through me, and I stopped, intent upon the extraordinary thing that was happening to me. An exquisite pleasure had invaded my senses, something isolated, detached, with no suggestion of its origin, and at once the vicissitudes of life had become indifferent to me, its disasters innocuous, its brevity illusory, this new sensation having had on me the effect which love has, of filling me with a precious essence, or rather that essence was not in me, it was me. The incident of the Madeleine occurs on page 48 of my 3,294-page edition of In Search of Lost Time. It is probably the most famous incident in the novel because it occurs so soon. Most people, if they read In Search of Lost Time at all, read only volume 1 of 7, Swan's Way. And those who do choose to read the novel often interpret the incident of the Madeleine as a strictly serious reflection on memory. But it is my belief that the incident of the Madeleine is not a reflection on memory, but instead satire. In fact, it would be very hard to genuinely enjoy this novel if it were not read as satire. I can speak from personal experience on that front, as this is why I absolutely hated the novel the first time I read it, purely finishing it out of spite. But if one reads In Search of Lost Time in a satirical light, then it reveals itself to be a very funny, and often darkly comedic book that is certainly worth the appreciation it has received in the near 100 years since it was first published, which would not be the case if the book were read seriously. For those unfamiliar with the novel, here's a brief summary taken from Patrick Alexander's Marcel Proust's Search for Lost Time, and a representative puppet show. Psych, I couldn't be bothered to do a puppet show, so I'm just gonna read it. Swan's Way. The taste of a Madeleine dipped in tea recalls the narrator's childhood visits to Cambrai, his family's country walks along the two ways, their relationship with various neighbors, including Charles Swan, and the narrator's fascination with the aristocratic Guermantes. The second part tells the story of Swan's unhappy love affair with the courtesan Odette de Crécy in the salon of Madame Verdurin. The novel's final section describes the friendship between the narrator and Gilberte, the daughter of Swan and Odette, who is now Madame Swan. Within a budding grove. The first half describes the narrator's adolescence in Paris in two upper-middle-class households, that of his parents and that of the Swans. The second half takes place in Baalbec in the Normandy coast, where he stays in the Grand Hotel with his grandmother. The Paris section mocks haute bourgeois pretensions, while the Baalbec section contains equally amusing descriptions of provincial bourgeois affectations. Recovered from his infatuation with Gilberte, the narrator now falls in love with every girl he sees, of which there are many. He makes friends with Robert de Saint-Loup and his uncle Baron de Charlus. The Guermantes Way. The narrator's family moves next door to the Paris residence of the Duc and Duchesse de Guermantes, and the narrator becomes obsessed with making their acquaintance. He spends weeks at a military academy with their nephew, Robert de Saint-Loup, whom he met at Baalbec. Eventually the narrator is accepted into the magic circle of the Guermantes and the Faubourg Saint-Germain. Very French, very nice. Cities of the Plain. Continuing his social success in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, the narrator also discovers the hidden homosexual world of the Guermantes Baron de Charlus. On his second visit to Baalbec, he becomes part of the Verdurins' little clan, rekindling his love affair with Albertine, and discovers the world of lesbianism. The Captive. The narrator brings Albertine to live with him in Paris while he treats her more like a captive. Obsessively jealous, he discards his social circle and alternately tries to please her or leave her. Above all, he tortures himself, thinking about, asking about, and neurotically thwarting any possible indulgence in her lesbian tastes. Meanwhile, Charlus's public behavior becomes increasingly outrageous until he is publicly disgraced by the now influential Verdurins. Albertine leaves without warning. The Fugitive. The narrator gradually recovers from the disappearance and subsequent death of Albertine. He rediscovers Gilberte, who with her mother Odette is now adopted by smart society, while the memory of her father, Swan, is hidden and destroyed. The narrator visits Venice with his mother and learns by letter of Saint-Loup's marriage to Gilberte. After his marriage, Saint-Loup becomes an active and promiscuous homosexual. Time regained. Visiting Gilberte in her home in Cambrai, the narrator learns that Swan's Way and the Guermantes Way are not irreconcilable. The war affects everyone differently. Robert dies a hero at the front. Charlus haunts the male brothels of wartime. The narrator, still an unsuccessful writer, returns to Paris after the war and is invited to an afternoon party at the Princess de Guermantes' home. All of the novel's characters, or those still living, are at the party, but everyone has changed. Time has destroyed everything. Even now, the Princesse de Guermantes turns out to be the widowed Madame Verdurin. The narrator realizes that memory can only be recaptured and time defeated through art. With a sense of joy, in the middle of the party, he realizes that his vocation is to write a great novel and thus bring the past back to life. Now, for those of you following along in your copies, you may have noticed that I substituted the narrator in place of Marcel. Put a pin in that, we're going to come back to that. But first, let's play America's favorite game, Identify the Dead Writer. Hello, and welcome back to Identify the Dead Writer. I'm your host, Percy. For those of you unfamiliar, the aim of the game is to identify which writer Marcel Proust, known among his friends as a fantastic mimic, was trying to parody with each of his following characters. Well, let's get on with our first contestant. So, starting off strong with our resident gay caricature, the Baron de Charlus. This silver fox enjoys spontaneous affairs with tailors and making friends with people who make fun of him behind his back. This character is widely believed to have been a parody of Robert de Montesquieu. Robert de Montesquieu was a writer about 15 years Marcel Proust Sr., who Proust was famous for imitating. Though never explicitly stated that the Baron was a Montesquieu parody, those who knew Montesquieu personally instantly recognized his character in the Baron de Charlus. Let's move on with our next contestant. Yes, the narrator. Let's take out that pin from before. The narrator is often referred to in discussions of the book as Marcel, after Marcel Proust. But I think it would be wrong to say that the narrator is entirely based on Marcel Proust. In fact, I think it would be more correct to say that the narrator is... That's right, the narrator is this man you've probably never seen or heard of before. This is Gide, contemporary and friend of Marcel Proust. Now you may be wondering, if you have read this book, why you have not necessarily heard of this person. But if you look at the writings of Gide, you will find some similarities to the prose of In Search of Lost Time. Here's a passage from Gide's diaries. For the last 2 months, I have not enjoyed a single moment of monologue. I am not even egotistical any longer. I am not even anything any longer. Last from the day when I began my book. Now compare that to the first few sentences of In Search of Lost Time. For a long time I used to go to bed early. Sometimes when I had put out my candle, my eyes would close so quickly that I had not even time to say to myself, I'm falling asleep. And this similarity further extends to accounts of Gide's behavior, displaying a similar impatience with both his writing and his friends as the narrator does. He was described by fellow writer Roger Martin Dugard as lacking gift that is essential to the true novelist. He doesn't know how to stand boredom. The moment anyone ceases to stimulate him, he loses all interest. It's the same with the characters in his books. He usually begins to lose interest in them towards the 150th page, and so he rounds off the story anyhow, the quicker the better, like a schoolboy with an imposition. This characterized reluctance to focus is similar to the narrator's own impatience with his writing ability. This, as well as the writing similarities, leads me to believe that the whole novel was an elaborate joke to poke fun at Gide by Marcel Proust. And he had a reason to. First, it was because Gide outed Proust as gay at a time when it was not necessarily socially acceptable in France to be gay. Then when Proust was trying to get Swann's Way published, Gide rejected it for his Nouvelle Revue Française. Then, after Swann's Way was wildly successful, Gide said to Proust, For me, you were still the man who frequented the houses of Madames X and Z, the man who wrote for the Figaro. I thought of you, shall I confess, as Ducote de chez Veteran, a snob, a man of the world, a dilettante, the worst possible thing for a review. Then Gide wrote in his diary his doubts that any Jewish writer, Proust was Jewish, could truly master the virtues of the French tradition, which was not a good look, and persuaded Proust to write 6 more volumes mocking him. I mean, the best revenge is living well, and being lauded as one of the best French writers of the 20th century while the person who mocked is largely forgotten is pretty much the definition of living well. So good for Proust. Our third and final contestant is Mademoiselle Vinteuil's friend. Those of you who have read the novel may remember Mademoiselle Vinteuil's friend as not having a name, appearing in one scene in which she spits on her girlfriend's dead father's picture, and being the object of the narrator's jealousy for the greater part of the novel, despite her absence. But who does Mademoiselle Vinteuil's friend represent? At first I thought she might be a personification of Marcel Proust, a foil of the narrator, and therefore Gide. But really, Mademoiselle Vinteuil's friend is... That's right, Mademoiselle Vinteuil's friend is the spirit of homosexuality. Not a dead author, but I tried. Mademoiselle Vinteuil's friend is so absent yet so present throughout the novel that she is less a character and more a ghost haunting the novel. And that concludes our show, folks. Thanks for joining me. Search of Lost Time, I hated it. It seemed convoluted and obsessive, especially with its treatment of Albertine, the love interest of the narrator throughout most of the novel. The fourth volume is translated in my edition as Cities of the Plain, but would more accurately be translated as Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom is usually interpreted as being inhabited by the male gaze of the novel, i.e. the Baron de Charlus and later Robert de Saint-Loup, the ones that were depicted as desperate and destined to be alone. Ironic, as Proust himself was a gay man. But Gomorrah was inhabited by the female gaze of Albertine and Mademoiselle Vinteuil's friend, who live lives of pleasure, with only onlookers like the narrator making their lives difficult. In the sixth volume, spoiler alert for a novel that came out 100 years ago, Albertine dies, and instead of properly mourning her death, the narrator gets really dramatic, says, "But Albertine was dead so many times," and looks further at whether or not she was a lesbian. At that time, I was under the impression that the narrator was a Marcel Proust stand-in, and I thought, how pathetic can this man be that he was more obsessed with finding out the sexual orientation of his dead girlfriend than her death? And then I realized that this pathétique was intentional. Proust was not using the narrator as a stand-in, he was making fun of people like the narrator. That is the genius of Proust that no one seems to talk about, or even realize in academic readings of the book. And I think if we were to make In Search of Lost Time into more than this grand masterpiece that you're supposed to like because reasons, into this nuanced and clever and funny piece of art, then we could successfully get young people to read this novel that has in the past been reserved for uppity academics. In Search of Lost Time could be a novel for all time, as I believe it was always intended to be. I hope you liked this video and my interpretation of the novel, and if you haven't already and you have an interest in the novel, I encourage you to read it for yourself. This is my first YouTube video, so please be kind in the comments, I'm still learning. Thank you to the Sternad family for funding this project, and to Marty Frazier and Tyler Zeleny for helping with my script, and for answering the questions I had about the video editing software that I used. Thanks for watching, bye!